Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Commons and Conversation. My name is Drew Lindsay. I'm an editor and writer at the Chronicle Philanthropy. The Commons and Conversation is an interview series that's an extension of a project that we have launched here at the Chronicle called The Commons. It's a place where we're exploring division in the country and philanthropy's efforts to bring Americans together, strengthen communities, and strengthen democracy itself. You can find the project at philanthropy.com/the Commons. I'm excited today to welcome Danielle Allen. You might recognize her name as she's a contributing columnist to the Atlantic magazine, and she's the author of several widely acclaimed books. A few of those titles focus very tightly on democracy, including Our Declaration, a reading of the Declaration of Independence in Defense of Equality. Danielle is what you might call a scholar of democracy renovation or reform. How can we make the system stronger, and how can we make it work better for more Americans? She does a lot of that work as the director of the Allen Lab for Democracy Renovation at Harvard's Kennedy School. She's also the director of the Democratic Knowledge Project. It's a research lab focused on civic education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It's really important for our conversation today for folks to understand that Danielle was one of the authors of Our Common Purpose, a report from the Academy of Arts and Sciences that outlined 31 very specific proposals to strengthen democracy. These include a lot of fixes for government and elections, things like ranked choice voting, things like enlarging the House of Representatives, establishing 18-year terms for Supreme Court justices. But that report also included a lot of suggestions for how to reboot civic life in America and strengthen civic health at the grassroots level. So to me, she's just got a terrific and wide-ranging perspective that's ideal for this conversation today. So Danielle, thank you for being here and taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much, Drew. I'm glad to be here. It's an important conversation. So thank you for sponsoring it.
Thanks. Well, let me start in a sense with a bit of a status check. You are a democracy scholar. You've been doing this for years. At the current moment, we have a lot of folks that are talking about democracy in danger. So the question I have for you is, do you see threats to democracy at this point, and where do those threats come from?
Well, I'll tell you, I've started using a kind of crazy metaphor for answering that question. I get asked that question a lot, I'll be honest.
I bet. Yep.
And what I say to folks is, look, it's kind of like we're a bear in the woods, caught in a trap, being attacked by wolves, and there's a wildfire raging on the edge of the forest. All right. And so it doesn't matter what party you're in, people on all sides of the political spectrum feel like they're being attacked by wolves in the political process, by politicians who have a really different picture of what our society should be like. And every 2 years, people are pouring tons of energy and so forth into trying to fend off whom they perceive as the wolves. You've got your gray wolves and your white wolves. Everybody's got their wolves.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's this wildfire, okay? And that's the incredible transformations in our global economy, the way that's fueled by technology, the connection of that to climate change, the impacts on human migration, which has produced unprecedented levels of people moving around the globe, destabilizing cultures and societies. That's the wildfire. There's a lot of stuff we really have to deal with.
Yeah.
But our foot's caught in the trap. We keep forgetting that our foot's caught in the trap. The trap is basically democratic institutions that have frozen up, gotten paralyzed. They're not doing their job of being responsive to us and supporting shared problem solving. And so from my point of view, instead of just thinking about the wolves, what we've got to really do is spring the trap, get our foot out of that dang trap, so that we can actually function productively as a democratic society amongst ourselves, across lines of difference, and then with institutions that work on our behalf. So that's my sense of where we are. We've got our foot caught in a trap, dealing with wolves, trying to deal with wildfire at the same time.
Can you talk about what are those institutions that have us in those traps? And I assume these relate to the reforms from the Our Common Purpose report, but what are the institutional changes that might help us get out of that trap?
Exactly. Yes. No, thanks so much. I mean, we have a sort of tough situation where institutions that are supposed to be about governing the people, by the people, for the people, all of us, have actually been captured. And to some extent, that's capture by moneyed interest or the kind of emerging concentrations of power we're seeing in the technology space. It's also, though, capture by how our political parties have come to operate. And this is true for both parties. So this is not a partisan point. But both our parties have over time come to operate on a declining population base, fewer members, more Americans are not in parties. And then you layer on top of that things like gerrymandering and low turnout in party primaries, and you have a situation where actually a sliver of the electorate is selecting our elected officials. 5%, 8% of the electorate in any given district is actually who's putting people in office. That means that's who they work for.
Right.
And so if you only work for a narrow sliver, then you're not incentivized to do problem solving for a general picture of the public good. So a lot of accidents, institutional accidents over time led to that. But that's the trap and produces polarization and dysfunction in our legislature. And then when that's frozen up and can't really function properly, folks get frustrated. You want something to get done? So fine, let's have somebody who can get some stuff done. Right. And then that's the kind of dynamic we end up in, which is not stable for a democratic society.
I want to clarify for folks, because I think you've cited this research, I believe, and I've seen it myself in terms of that, the impact of gerrymandering, for example, in that 5%. So in both Marjorie Taylor Greene's district in Georgia and AOC's district in New York, they are so tilted in partisanship, they are so one-sided that whoever wins the primary is definitely going to win the general, and really only 5% of the entire population vote in either of those primaries. So you've got people coming to office by virtue of only having the support of 5% of the voters. Is that,
exactly.
That's
roughly
the kind of thing you're.
We have sort of 85% of or roughly 85% of congressional districts in the country now that are not competitive at the general election. They're only competitive in the primary. And yes, in general, we're seeing reduced turnout in primaries of all kinds, all kinds of races. And so, yes, it does mean a very small percentage of people, are in fact selecting the folks who end up being the office holders.
So interesting. Well, let me ask, in terms of the questions of what are the recommendations or what are other sort of proposals to release us from that trap? Where do you think we have some potential for getting out of that trap? What are the proposals you think might have traction and could succeed in the next year or two? And then where might be some proposals that you feel like are not getting much traction?
Well, I think the first thing we have to say, actually, when we're thinking about getting ourselves out of the trap, and can be a little hard, I think, for us all to get our heads around, is that we've actually got to work on institutions and culture at the same time. And that's where the Our Common Purpose report really comes in. It has a set of institutional recommendations and also a set of culture recommendations. That's why in my own work, I do that double-barreled thing. In the Harvard Kennedy School, I work on institutions, and in the Ed School, I work on civic education. The work's got to be holistic. We actually have to have relationships with each other where we are willing to cross those lines and work on solving problems together. The cultural part is always, upstream from what is institutionally possible. On the institutional side, again, there's no silver bullet, but I do think that one promising reform is replacing our current party primary system with a single all-party primary. So all candidates from all parties run in the same primary election, and then a set of finalists. It could be two, like Louisiana, California, and Washington, go on to the general. It could be four, like Alaska. Alaska takes 4 finalists forward and uses ranked choice voting. So there are a couple of different options for it, but what they do is change the incentives for elected officials and require people to campaign to the whole electorate, stay in their minds responsible to the whole electorate. And that actually opens up negotiating space for them when they're in the legislature.
What will it take to get some of those proposals? And obviously you're changing how people vote or how elections are decided. What are the mechanisms to get that sort of change passed?
Well, the beauty of America, there's lots of beauties of America, right? One beauty of America is that we truly are, as has been said, sort of laboratories of democracy. 50 different versions of the way to do this thing called self-government for free and equal citizens. And in fact, people often forget in our own history that before the Declaration of Independence, before July 4th, 1776, the colonies had actually all started writing constitutions for themselves. And they didn't all write them the same way. And it was exactly because they were experimenting with how do you organize power so you could have this thing called freedom. That's what made then the writing of the Constitution possible. Anyway, that's still true. So the point is simply that we actually have 50 different election systems. And so how you get change through 50 different answers. Okay.
Right.
Ballot initiatives in these
states,
state legislature laws in these other states. Sometimes you got to do things at the municipal level before you do them at the state level. Sometimes it's the reverse. You got to diagnose your place. And so maybe I know this is a long-winded answer.
No.
Just conclude it by saying the first fact of democracy, really, and the practice of democracy, is that it is in a place. You got to start by knowing your place. And so I think I would say we all actually think too much about swing states and, what's my role in impacting a swing state? I would say, let's think about home. How can you make democracy healthier in your home state, whatever state it is? Let's start there.
Okay. The question of at the state level, I know there were a number of ranked choice voting efforts on the ballot in 2024. Not a lot of them successful. You have seen success in places like Alaska, New York City. Are there lessons from those two places that can help make this possible in other states?
Absolutely. Well, for starters, I actually spent a lot of time thinking about how people have made change at other points in history. So, for example, the period from the end of the last Gilded Age at the end of the 19th century through the early 20th century, where we got women's right to vote, we got direct election of senators, we got really big changes through. And the truth is, it's like 40-year period, all right? Let's be honest here about what it actually takes. So I think that's the story now, too. We live in a Gilded Age. We need to recognize that. And Gilded Ages drive separation, they drive inequality, they drive polarization, they weaken the social fabric. Democracy can't function well in that context. It's the antithesis of what a democracy needs to thrive. So by definition, if we want to hang on to, that, as Lincoln said, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, always for the people, on behalf of the people, then we're going to have to make some adjustments to change those dynamics. And so I think, some things will win, they'll lose. It's a long arc of change. And the question is really, what's our motivation? Do we want to keep government of the people, by the people, for the people? That's the real question we should focus on.
Well, let me look at the other, as you said, the other part of your two-shot barrel, in a sense, the habits of heart and mind, I think is what our Commons Purpose Report puts it. Talk a little bit about civic education, because that's where you put a lot of your effort. How do you see that playing a role parallel to the government and election reform?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. Thank you, Drew. And maybe I'll just actually start by telling a bit of the story of how I came to do the work in civic education. It's actually the work in civic education that has made me feel that the institutional work is necessary. It often surprises people. But the short of it is, I was living in Chicago, teaching at the University of Chicago. I had an opportunity to help set up a night course for low-income adults in the humanities. The idea was to give people who had fallen out of the educational system a chance to get back into it. And I was at the University of Chicago at the time as a faculty member. The goal of this course was that we would give our night students the same caliber of education as we gave our well-heeled day students. That produced a conundrum. A lot of our night students, didn't have a high school degree, were working two jobs, juggling kids, medical situations, the whole kit and caboodle. So how do you do that? And the answer was, well, okay, we're not going to compromise at all on the quality of the material that we are sharing with our students. But we will compromise on length. And so for that completely instrumental, tactical reason, I started teaching the Declaration of Independence. Only 1,337 words. And so there you go, like history class, philosophy class, writing class, literature class.
All in one.
It was electric, exactly. And it was electric. It's a story of agency, and my students saw that immediately and took it and ran with it. And that was just, the most powerful teaching experience I'd ever had. And it made me realize that my students, actually, they came into that class, young adults, they had never previously encountered the Declaration of Independence. And nobody had ever suggested to them, if they had encountered it, that it belonged to them. that it was theirs, that it communicated their power, their civic agency, their civic responsibility. So that was how I got into the work of civic education. I first just tried to start reintroducing people to the Declaration of Independence, and then it grew. Teachers would ask for material and resources, and now, working with many, many people, Educating for American Democracy is a fantastic initiative nationwide where we have got a framework for excellence in history and civic learning. But as I was working on that national framework and piloting, year-long curricula here in Massachusetts and so forth, I had this feeling standing up in classrooms with kids where I'd be, communicating the importance to them of participating, of preparing to vote, of preparing to take their role, and feeling like, how can I honestly invite them into participating in this mess?
Yeah.
How can I look at them with a straight face and say, this is going to be worth your time? And so that is what made me feel like I had to also put energy into making our institutions worthy of our kids.
Indeed. But the civics education, I'm curious, in the comments, we're often looking at efforts and work that is finding some common ground, finding something that a lot of Americans can come together behind. And I hear a lot from conservatives about the answer to democracy is civics education. So I'm curious whether you see, your discovery of civics as something so fundamental for people. Do you see this work as one of those places of common ground where for all Americans could come together in a way that would strengthen democracy?
Yes. I mean, this is a beautiful thing about civic education. Actually, there's at this point a lot of opinion polling to back this up, that it is a cross-partisan supermajority point of view that we should have more civics education for our kids. Also, astonishingly, it's a cross-partisan supermajority point of view that we should teach our kids a complete history, the good and the bad, that we can be honest and support the development of reflective patriotism at the same time. So the Educating for American Democracy Roadmap really does that. We built a cross-ideological coalition of scholars and educators from around the country, 300 people, to answer the question of what is excellence in history and civic learning. And we achieved a shared answer. So to your point, yes, there is an appetite. It is possible for us to cross our various lines of difference and work on civic education for kids together.
And what is that what did y'all find in terms of what are the elements of really good civic education?
So excellent civic education depends on focusing on knowledge, core knowledge, also dispositions and virtues and skills, all of these things. Because at the end of the day, citizenship, being a civic participant, that's not something you just know about, right? The whole purpose of that knowledge is for the doing, for the stepping up and taking responsibility. So knowledge, skills, dispositions, and virtues. And that was really where we had some work to do, was to bring parts of the field that focused on that core disciplinary knowledge, separation of powers, checks and balances, history of the Constitution, and so forth. And then there was a portion of the field that really focused on skills. How do you help young people understand their immediate environment, know where the levers of power are, know how to write a letter to your mayor, et cetera. So we had to bring those different communities together into a shared conversation, sort of shared purpose. So
could I ask on this, the two-barrel approach, what are some of the other suggestions, proposals, recommendations for building that civic health at the community level? Civic education is one way, but what are some of the other ideas for changing hearts and minds in a sense?
Yes, no, that's terrific. There's so much good work in the ecosystem now. It's really astonishing. So as I'm sure you know, all kinds of good work around pluralism and supporting people and learning how to build bridges across every possible axis of difference, ideological or racial or religious, et cetera. So that's really important work. I think another piece that's really valuable is sort of new growth in adult civic learning programs, and even the inclusion of such programs as benefits that employers can offer to employees. So I think we're seeing just the very beginnings of a movement to support people in achieving not just work-life balance, but work-life civic balance. I think they've acknowledged if you live in a democracy, if you care about a democracy, then we all have to figure out how to get our time, our personal time to work so that we can have our work role and our personal role and also a civic role. That takes some adjustments, right? Supporting people in developing themselves along that dimension.
Is this a moment of opportunity on both fronts, in a sense, with the 250th anniversary of the country coming up? There's going to be a lot of attention over the next year to celebrating that. Is this a moment for focusing democracy reform efforts, whether on the structural elections governance side or on the civic health side? Is this a key moment?
For sure, 100%. Jefferson said that thing about every 20 years you need renewal, and his image was very graphic. I mean, he had an idea of like revolution every 20 years. And I think obviously like that's not healthy. That's not the way that you want to go.
Yeah.
But I do think that instinct that democratic societies need to routinely renew themselves is spot on. And so actually, in a funny way, anniversaries, every beat of time are that opportunity for generational renewal. And I do think celebrating our 250th is about that. I would commend Monticello, which has just announced a nationwide Declaration of Independence reading book club. So I'd encourage people to go to that website and sign up. And, it's a do-it-yourself kit, get some neighbors together, get your church together, get people in your community together. But that is where it starts. And claiming that text as our own in the present can, I believe, animate a new generation of civic spirit.
Let me ask, for our audience, professionals in the nonprofit space, what do you see as the opportunities? If the next year is a moment of opportunity, where can philanthropy and nonprofits come along and help support this work?
Great. No, thank you so much for that question. So I'm going to answer, but I first want to just name a couple of the challenges of working in this space that often make it hard for people to jump into it. So when we think about democracy holistically, and there's the culture side and the institution side, there's a sense in which the culture side is actually the easier side. It can be all education, all 501c3 work, very straightforward. The institutional side is a kind of blend of 501c3 and 501c4 work. So that can be tricky for people sometimes to think about if it's connected to 501c4 work, which gets a bit more political. So the reason I'm saying that is because it's important that people know who they are. If they're a pure 501c3 org, great, no problem. If you've got comfort with the 501c4 space as well, also great. Pick your lane. It's okay to pick a lane. And what we all need to do, though, is have a kind of map of what we're trying to do so that we're pulling in the same direction. I think that's really important. And the map that I think is most helpful in this regard is the map that More Perfect has offered. More Perfect is a philanthropic campaign organized around the Our Common Purpose report. And so some of the pillars are about culture work, and some of the pillars are about institutional work, and there are clear strategies there. And I think if people reach out to the More Perfect campaign, they can get the very clear tracks, targets and maps and so forth for where to invest, and be certain that you're going to have a valuable return on your investment. So that's the first thing to say. Then, sort of secondly, once you pick your lane. So now I'll just talk about civic education for a moment. For that ecosystem, we're working on three things: building civic education curricula and programs, winning the policy paradigms at the state level that support time in school on civic education.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then sustaining that work by investing in the people who make it possible: the educators, the district leaders, and the families. Really, really important that we can't do this work without family engagement. So if what you're interested in is civic education, you can be a builder, you can help win some stuff, you can be a sustainer. And again, it's like, who are you? Like, that's where I think philanthropists need to ask, like, who am I? Which of those things is right for me? Because figure that out, and then you can do that knowing that other people are doing the other things. And that's, I think, where the kind of power of philanthropic investment in this ecosystem lies.
Can I ask, since you've been in the field for so long, I'm curious whether you have a sense of the investment and attention that philanthropy has paid to the democracy space over the years.
Yeah.
Have you seen that change, and or is it sort of ebbs and flows, and where are we at that point in terms of philanthropy investment?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, certainly it changes over time. And in some sense, when I'm talking about some of those pain points, right, the
Mm-hmm.
challenges that might be obstacles, you're hearing me reflect on what I've observed about philanthropy in the space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we can't talk about democracy without talking about institutions and possibly changing them. And
Mm-hmm.
the only way to change institutions in our democracy is through the political process.
Right.
So
Right.
you can't have a complete conversation about democracy that puts politics completely on the side. And
Mm-hmm.
so partly what I want to say is, like, don't be afraid of that. The fact that there's politics involved trying to change institutions doesn't make it partisan. There's a heck
Yeah.
of a lot of like nonpartisan stuff that you can do in our political process. So
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of the first thing. And then the second thing is, the other reason not to be afraid of that fact about the democracy conversation is, it's okay. Like, you do you. You just do the C3 part of the democracy conversation.
Yep.
Just make sure you do it, understanding the whole picture, knowing who's in the C4 lane or the more political lane, and having some kind of mutual visibility,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
we haven't had those things. And so I would say the kind of past philanthropic ecosystem has invested less in democracy work than you might expect, given its importance. Right? I
Right.
mean, everything else depends on it. So you kind of think like, so you're kind of
Yeah.
you're conditioned for doing business. You need this thing to
Right.
be
Right.
sound. So it's had less investment than that would suggest. And I think the reason is for these pain points that I've been trying to describe.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me ask this as sort of a closeout. We'd like to offer our audience some suggestions. We're in summer. If there are books or podcasts or movies or documentaries that you would recommend as someone who's been in this space for a long time, you're studying it, is there something you think is sort of an eye opener for folks or sort of a primer to some of the ideas you've been talking about?
I'm going to be really, I mean, I hope this isn't boring, but really just basic and say, go back to the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
sign up for that Monticello book club
Mm-hmm.
and really read the whole thing, not just
Yeah.
the famous second sentence, but read the list of grievances. The list of
Mm-hmm.
grievances is a very precise picture of what people need to feel free, to be free, to live in healthy ways. Lots of things are still relevant. Due process, for
Yep.
example, is a part
Yep.
of the story in the Declaration of Independence. So, at any rate, I would just really encourage people to go back to that and check out the Monticello Book Club.
Terrific. Well, that's great help. We're putting together a list from experts like yourself of things that people want to look at maybe as they head to the beach in the next few weeks. So thank you for that. Thank you also for taking the time to be with us. We're going to wrap this one up just so our audience knows we're going to, and thank you for being here. Our audience to know we're going to take a break in August. This is a monthly interview series. We're going to take a break in August and be back in September. We've already got a very special guest lined up. It's going to be Tim Shriver, who's the chairman of Special Olympics, and also is doing a lot of work with the Dignity Index on sort of increasing belonging and feeling of community in America. So stay tuned for details on that. And again, thank you, Danielle, for being with us. And everybody have a good day. Take care.
Thank you, Drew. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.